All right, kids. In August of 1960, Frankie Lyman made an appearance on Dick Clark's Saturday Night Beach Nut show. Beach Nut being a chewing gum company who sponsored what I'm showing you now. The product placement, not the racism. Well, so it kind of definitely seems like these girls are future Karens who have subdued reactions to Lyman and his song, Little Pretty Bitty One, because they were discovering at that very moment that the person they've been hearing on the radio was black. However, as the story goes, minutes before Frankie doo-wopped his way on stage, the audience was warned by ABC executives not to leave their seats. Nothing racist about that. We will get back to this later. Today we're going to talk about the decade that preceded this. And while we're going to focus on who wants to go back to the past, we need to figure out why. As you're about to see, Middle America has a lot to say about a time they claim was defined by God, country, and family. It's all about what's unsaid. We know what they really mean.
Take a look at the New York City skyline from the 50s. Skyscrapers decorated with the Holy Cross on Good Friday. A symbol of an American metropolis upholding tradition.
Hold up. Whose tradition?
But you won't see that in the city today. Behind those lights was a sense of purpose, community, piety. And that's slowly leaving this town. And not just leaving New York. America is losing sight of the defining values that made us great.
Whose values? That's Jesse Waters from Fox News getting nostalgic about the 1950s, when brown people couldn't immigrate here, Muslims wouldn't be found here, and queer communities simply shouldn't be. Now, usually, when someone Jesse Waters' age waxes poetic about older generations, you can expect them to say something disrespectful about Gen Z or millennials. This generation is so soft, like mother effers in the 60s weren't having breakdowns because a black person was in the same store as them. But no, this 46-year-old man. Oh. We're going to talk about purpose and cite a survey conducted with a nonpartisan research organization which said that patriotism, religious faith, having children, and community involvement used to be very important. Now it's all about the money. And while we're cherry picking pictures, I wonder if keeping black children out of public schools was seen as being patriotic in the 50s. What religion are these students practicing? Is the whole community involved in this? Meanwhile, their parents could afford to buy a house, 2 cars, and all of these whites only signs off of one income. Just a few weeks ago, we talked about how much money people are paying to eat fast food today versus in the 90s, which is one example of why money could be valued more nowadays. Anyways, that survey correlates with other surveys and polls, which suggest that 2/3 of Republicans believe things have changed for the worse since the 1950s, compared with half of independents and only 30% of Democrats. Similarly, 71% of white evangelical Protestants say the country has changed for the worse since the 1950s. Plus, those who most trust conservative media and Fox News are more likely to say that the country has changed for the worse since the 1950s. And it makes sense if Democrats felt the same way about America after a Repubs administration was in office. So, we can not only understand how a 46-year-old white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male who worked for Fox News would see this one picture as a representation of what America used to be, but not, say, this picture of Cecil J. Williams from 1956 sipping from a whites-only water fountain as representing America. With that said, as much as I complain about the current state of the U.S., I can't imagine any black person, under any circumstances, will want to go back to Jim Crow. That would be weird.
During Jim Crow, the black family was together.
That's right.
During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people always have been conservative minded, but more black people voted conservatively. And then H.E.W., Lyndon Johnson, and then you go down that road, and now we are where we are.
I'm not saying anything new here, but not only would Republican Representative Byron Donalds not have his wife and family during legal segregation due to miscegenation laws, he knows this, he'll admit it, but he wouldn't have his black job back then either. There were only 4 black members of Congress in the 1950s: William Dawson, Adam Powell, Charles Diggs, and Robert Nix. All of them were in the House of Representatives, but they were all Democrats. Wonder what that's about. And a Byron Donalds could be the type who blames President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal for locking black people into what black conservatives call the Democratic plantation, in a country that actually kept people enslaved into the period he yearns for some 90 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. But if he really wanted to go back to the 1950s while staying a Republican in Congress, he would need to get his FDR fireside chat on so people wouldn't see his face.
Who said that? You gonna see my face?
I haven't thought this through, but I mean, we already know what would happen if Middle America heard his voice on the radio and then saw that melanated face in person. Going back to Frankie Lyman, who I mentioned earlier, the reason why producers on Dick Clark's show, along with law enforcement, asked their audience to tone it down is because on July 19, 1957, Frankie Lyman began to dance with a teenage white girl while performing on an episode of Alan Freed's live ABTV show, The Big Beat. This was scandalous. Southern TV stations went off, and The Big Beat was canceled. Dick Clark, even though he did a lot for integration, didn't want any part of that. But hey, something black families, something Democrat policies, ignore former President Eisenhower's Highways Act and urban renewal, which destroyed black communities, something. Being real, Byron Donalds doesn't want to go back to the 1950s. But I hope he wouldn't want to bring traditional marriages back to the future.
My husband woke up and told me he was craving fresh baked cookies. So I went to the backyard, into my garden to really contemplate on who the f*** asked him what he was craving.
Housewives of the 1950s had to take a tranquilizer called Milltown just to cope with the day-to-day. And trad wives, you know, a woman who embraces traditional values and are often stay-at-home wives or mothers, and they enjoy embracing the role of a homemaker. Yeah, they may be trending now, but not among black women. Could make an entire episode of why that is. Yet still, a black person wouldn't long for an era in America when it was revolutionary for a woman of any color to wear pants and monumental for a woman to get a credit card by herself, would they? In an opinion piece she wrote called Father's Day Necessity, Fathers, conservative commentator and former PragerU contributor Amala Ekpunobi says that fatherlessness affects all races and all people, even those who grew up with two parents. She adds, sure, this is a black issue, but it's also an every race issue. She noted that her parents got divorced when she was young. Quote, suddenly I was seeing my dad less and less, she said about her father, who is Nigerian. Yet, after she goes into a few stats about the rate of U.S. children under the age of 18 who live with two parents and the marriage rate among black women from 1890 to 1950, she blamed what the right calls the welfare state. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson expanded the federal welfare system that incentivized single motherhood through a man in the house rule that said if you have an able-bodied man in the house, the government wouldn't help. That doesn't exactly promote marriage. Well, in many countries, marriages are becoming less common, people are marrying later, and unmarried couples are increasingly choosing to live together, according to Our World in Data. And actually, the number of marriages each year per 1,000 people actually spiked here in America in 1971, before declining like it is around the world, including in countries such as South Korea, Australia, United Kingdom, Italy, Argentina, and Bolivia. There has been a decoupling of parenthood and marriage. The share of children born outside of marriages has increased substantially in almost all Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. What Amala Ekpunobi forgot to add was that the Nixon administration pretty much took the Office of Economic Opportunity apart, which operated the man out of the house benefits, redistributed what was left of it to other federal agencies, and eventually the office was shut down for good in 1981 by former President Ronald Reagan. So, at best, this man in the house policy may have been in effect for 17 years. Even with that, former President Bill Clinton ended welfare as we know it with the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996. Something else Amala left out of her opinion piece is, in 1968, just 4 years after LBJ signed the Economic Opportunity Act, the Supreme Court struck down the man in the house or substitute father regulation in King versus Smith as being contrary to the legislative goals of the Aid to Families of Dependent Children program established by the Social Security Act of 1934. Thank FDR. It's more like the man in the house policy had 4 years of impact. And I'm not saying 4 years can't do damage, that's pretty much the size of the gap between when I am proud to be an American, which is pretty much during the Olympics. And I usually don't bother content creators about fixes and remedies, but Amala Ekpunobi talks about messaging in her article, promoting marriage, Hollywood. I'm not saying these things have no influence, but policies definitely do. And she doesn't offer any ideas about how to help low-income and working-class families who needed assistance in the 50s and 60s to begin with. Republicans are currently trying to turn back the clock on no-fault divorce without acknowledging that this came from Governor Ronald Reagan. Nor are they calling for a return to the companion policy that is lifelong alimony. And I can't stress this enough. The entire world is staying away from putting rings on it. Meanwhile, the globe couldn't get enough of these rings. Speaking of,
I'm wore out, I'm tired. But here it is. Whenever I think about being wore out and being tired, you know, somebody get this on their phone and probably end up on Facebook with it. I ain't no little weak gymnast that quits when you go and get stuff. My generation is cut from a different cloth.
Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson. During the 2021 campaign event questioning the greatest gymnast of all time, which Simone Biles was even then when she had to drop out of the 2021 Olympics due to the twisties. She's only added more medals since. Robinson claimed, "My generation's cut from a different cloth." Yeah, soft fabric. Marky Mark is a 56-year-old man, the same age as Jesse Waters' aura, coming with this "people are too sensitive these days" thing, knowing that his era lost their minds when a black person sat in a wrong part of the bus. We've gone over this. He also wants to bring back aspects of pre-Voting Rights Act of 1965 America when black women got the right to vote, and apparently pre-1920s America when white women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment.
This idiotic guy was on stage with Candace Owens a few days ago and asked her, what America are we going back to make America great again? The one where women couldn't vote or black people were swinging from trees? I would say to him if I was standing in front of him, I absolutely want to go back to the America where women couldn't vote. Do you know why? Because in those days we had people who fought for real social change and they were called Republicans. And they are the reason why women can vote today.
Help me out. Was it Republicans that fought for legislation that led to progress, or liberals and progressives who happen to be in the GOP? Republicans aren't for freedom to do anything. Positive liberty. They like negative liberty, freedom from stuff, under the guise of religious freedom. The GOP and conservatives are more likely to say that rights have been expanded too far. Mark Robinson, by the way, wants to go back to the 1950s, no doubt, clearly before Roe v. Wade. In 2019, though, he said, "Abortion in this country is not about protecting the lives of mothers. It's about killing the child because you weren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down." And then later admitted that him and his wife decided to have an abortion around 30 years ago. He's been honest about this before, but what does he have to say about his wife's skirt? He lets her wear pants, right? There's currently a political ad of his where him and his wife speak on this matter, and it begs the question, is he doing this due to empathy or polling, which says how much Americans want access to making their own health decisions? Because when you said the only thing worse than a woman who doesn't know her place is a man who doesn't know his, and if blacks should stand up against racism and women should stand up against sexism, shouldn't men stand up against feminism? You don't get the benefit of the doubt. Him and people like him, they don't want freedom for freedom's sake. Quote, "It's negative freedom, a supposed conservative value that they object to. They want more restrictions placed on people. They want to place more power in the hands of the state, to control the press, to stifle citizens' criticism, and to limit voting. America isn't as free as other countries. See the World Freedom Index." With all of that said, two scholars at the University of Colorado Boulder argued that Trump tapped into what they call nostalgic racism. Nostalgia for the pre-civil rights industrial welfare state America of the 1950s. The author stated that 58% of all white Americans and 62% of white males voted for Trump. And then they asked, what if Trump is an example of white privileged heterosexual camp, a repackaged version of white 1950s hypermasculinity? Meanwhile, black and Hispanic voters who didn't turn out to vote for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in 2016 like they did for Obama in 2012 and 2008 may have considered Hillary's racial baggage with things as high rates of black incarceration and her husband's rollback of welfare in the 1990s. When MAGA says, make America great again, we know that they're talking about the 4 years of the Trump presidency, 2017 to 2021, and seeing how Trump supporters struggled with saying when America was great, and a complainer like me would just bring up our racism no matter what era or generation they brought up. I always assumed MAGA meant back to the 1980s because of Reagan. That's where Trump got his whole thing from anyway. Well, the America First thing came from somewhere else. I hope Ronnie makes a diss record about Donnie claiming to take shots like him, like Tupac did with Nas. Now that I think about it, when was the Reagan administration saying that America was great? The 1950s? Reagan went from Democrat to Republican in the early 60s, I think. Oh yeah. You should know that Frankie Lyman died of a heroin overdose at the age of 25. Although this took place in 1968, his life and untimely death might tell us what 1950s America was really about. Before I go, there was another poll, this one from The Economist, which showed that the 1950s just so happened to be the most popular decade for people over 65 years old, an age group that leans Republican. Meanwhile, the demographic that most love the 90s is millennials. We're going to be this ridiculous about a decade in 30 or 40 years. We're going to be all right.
You're aware that a Negro family has moved into Levittown?
Yes, I heard about it.
What was your reaction?
Dynamite. Dynamite.
What have you done about it?
Well, I guess we just discussed it.
How do you feel about the Myers moving in?
Well, I'm very definitely against it.
Before coming to Levittown, did you have any contact with Negroes?
Well, I came from a small town where we didn't have any colored people. And at that time I had no feelings either way. But while we were waiting for our house to be built, we lived in Trenton for 9 months. And, that was my first contact with them, both in work and going through colored sections to work. And I was very happy I was moving into an all-white community.
Have you ever discussed the Myers at home with your children?
Never before in our house was anything mentioned, pro or con.